Retro.
Hi, this is Fred Tatasciore, and you're listening to Dennis and Jay on Podcast Stardust. The Force is strong with both of them.
Welcome to Podcast Stardust. This is the fully armed and operational podcast dedicated to Star Wars news, reviews, and discussion. I'm Dennis Keithley.
And I'm Jay Krebs.
And it's time for the next installment in our series discussing The Force Awakens for its 10th anniversary. But before we dive into that, Jay, I want to go ahead and remind everybody where we can be found on social media.
Absolutely. And we'll still be here for our 10th anniversary. We are on Facebook and Instagram at Podcast Stardust. A couple years to get there, but I have a good feeling about this.
We're on our way. Okay. The distance is line, the signal's boosted to maximum output, the shield is down, and we're now broadcasting to the galaxy and taking our first steps. So, this is part 6 of the Force Awakens series. Normally we have a guest, but here's what's happened. Up until a day or two, and I'm recording this Thursday before this comes out, I wasn't sure we were going to be recording at all because you can still hear the cold in my voice. And so anyways, I tried to find a guest at the last minute, but it was just too late into the week. People had plans, and I don't begrudge anyone that. A lot of great people that we're going to have in the future, on the podcast in the future, but Jay and I are going to go along on this one, and that's fine because I'm not sure how much longer my voice is going to hold out. So we're doing the best we can here on Wednesday. This is the third episode recording for the day.
Yes.
But like I said, we are covering the segment of the movie that runs from 59 minutes and 45 seconds to 1 hour, 11 minutes, and 8 seconds. And this picks up in Maz Kanata's palace. And we've got Rey, Han, Finn sitting at a table with Maz Kanata. Rey is eating like she hasn't ever had food in her life. And they have already told Maz, not Rey, that they have a map to Luke Skywalker. And she's excited by this. And Han mentions that they need her to get this map to Leia, and she steadfastly refuses. She says, like, you're back in the mix, and then she's not going to send it to Leia. You've been running for too long. Go home. And then Han dejectedly says, well, Leia doesn't want to see me. And Maz makes a comment about him getting back in the fight, and Rey's asks, like, what fight? But anyway, a lot of other things happen here. Finn is adamantly opposed to going any further with this. And then Maz Kanata does the whole thing where she adjusts her goggles and calls up on the table. And Finn's like, what's she doing, Solo? And he's like, I don't know, but it's not good. I love that scene simply because it reminds me of like old people that are just like adjusting their glasses to see better and stuff like that. But then she gets this line that I love. I've seen evil take many forms, the Sith, the Empire. Today it's the First Order. The shadow is spreading across the galaxy. We must face them, fight them. And then Finn retorts that there is no fight against the Force Order. No one can win. And he believes that he's correctly predicting that they're on their way right now. So at any rate, it's an interesting scene. It sets the stage for a little bit. It kind of foreshadows some things that's going to happen with Han and Leia. And also finally cracks the notion that Finn has been hiding something from Rey. But what do you think about this portion of the scene overall?
Oh, yeah. This is such a loaded scene for sure. And I'm with you. I love how Rey is just all about grabbing everything that she can because, quarter portions only go so far. So I don't know if it was necessarily that she hadn't eaten in a week. She just hadn't had this kind of food. And you can see that kind of cornucopia of delight just sitting right in front of her. And so why wouldn't she grab that? But there's a few things that definitely stand out for me in this after watching it again. And, obviously Maz Kanata's castle kind of serves a similar sort of a purpose as the Mos Eisley Cantina, right? So it's this sort of hub of all of these Denzians from all over everywhere, and you've got smugglers and whatnot in there. But also, it's a place where people can embrace destiny, you know? So you've got Finn on the one side who is debating at this point, you know, coming out with his secret. And obviously he's dancing around the idea of how he knows so much about the First Order. You've got Han, who is just flat out trying to refuse to take this map to Leia, right? And, you know, Maz is sitting there like, go home, like, come on, like, get over yourself. This is, you just go do it. And then you've also got Maz, who in and of herself, I think, is sort of the, I don't want to say replacement for Yoda, because obviously she's not force sensitive, but she's this older and wiser being who has been there, done that, seen things. And, you know, when she says, through the ages, I've seen evil take many forms. I love this whole thing.
Mhm.
And you're just mesmerized by her because she's obviously been around the block more than once. And, but, you know, there are people that say that Maz could potentially be a little bit force sensitive, you know, because of the whole lightsaber thing that we're going to get to here in just a second. But I
Mhm.
mean, obviously, there's a lot of spokes in the wheel that are at this table. And there's a lot of different things that could potentially happen at this point. And you can feel a lot of that tension. But obviously, Maz is the hub of all of it that is, you know, propelling things in the way that they end up going. Especially when she tells Finn, you know, oh yeah, go look at them. They can get you off world if you don't want to be here. Like she's giving him the out.
Right. Right. Well, in my mind, there's no doubt that Maz is force sensitive in this. And I can't remember if it's in the deleted scene, a cut scene from the script, or the novelization, whatever. I think she ends up like attacking some stormtroopers with the force, like throwing them around with
Mhm.
telekinesis type of thing. But neither here
Cool.
nor there. What I love about this scene and this whole segment we're talking about is there's like, you know, we talk about the hero's journey quite a bit when it comes to Star Wars, and we know how much of a student George Lucas was of it. But Lawrence Kasdan, who is one of the writers of this, was as well, and you know, part of it was with his work with George. And there's like 3 different calls in this segment that we're talking about, this 10 minutes. 2 of them happen right here, and they both get rejected, which is, we all know, you know, I don't remember every step of the hero's journey on this, but I do know there is the call to action. And one, Maz tells Han, no, I'm not going to take that to Leia. You do it. And he says,
Yeah.
no, Leia doesn't want to hear from me. And then it's, you know, she gets up and she challenges Finn. And he's like, no, I'm not confronting the First Order. And then a little bit later, you know, the whole lightsaber vision scene, she's encouraging Rey to take up the saber, and she's like, I'm never touching that thing again.
Right.
And so, you know, typically you get
Where's my
one,
hero?
right, for one main character. You know, it's Luke in A New Hope and stuff like that. But you get 3 characters getting that opportunity here in this scene. That's like, go
Mhm.
on the adventure, do what you need to do. And all of them are rejecting it in this moment. Now, they all have the different reasons for coming around on this. They don't necessarily pick up the main quest, but they all participate for different reasons.
Mhm.
But I think Maz is a fantastic character. I wish she had been given more to do in The Last Jedi, and even more to
Yes.
do in The Rise of Skywalker. I mean,
Mhm.
you know, look, everyone has their own opinions about The Last Jedi. It's not my favorite Star Wars movie. It has nothing necessarily to do with, well, I'll say that when we talk about The Last Jedi. But a lot of good thematic things that happen, a lot of smart writing that happens there. But some of the choices that were made there are just not my favorite,
Okay.
regardless. In this situation, you know, she evokes the sage wisdom of Yoda, and this with the way she, you know, she doesn't speak in the broken syntax that he does, but you know, it's very pathetic, or you know, through the ages, you know, just the way she says that, you know, I've seen take evil take many forms, and her ability says like, I've seen the same, you see the same eyes in different people. I'm looking at the eyes of a man who wants to run away. I love that. You know, she's drawing back on a millennia of experience in
Yes.
this. One of my favorite authors is Agatha Christie, and I particularly like her Hercule Poirot mysteries, which, you know, Murder on the Orient Express, which I think is what everyone's always heard of. But then, you know, Marla Maples is her other main character. And Marla's feature is that she could figure out things because she knew people. And she would meet people that reminded her of people from the past, and then that would help her solve her mysteries. And so in this situation, you know, Maz Kanata is doing the same type of thing. She sees Finn, and she knows what he's going to do because of the way he's acting. She's using eyes, but she's looking into his soul is what it comes down to,
Oh yeah.
based on the way he's acting. And she predicts, like, your man's afraid. You want to run away. And she's hoping to challenge that out of him. It doesn't work in this instance, but eventually he comes around.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's so clever the way that they did the physical representation of, Maz using her lenses to focus and focus again, and then physically crawl across the table to look at Finn. I mean, obviously, that is for the audience to even get a little bit of maybe humor out of that, because it's like, what is she doing, Solo? And he keeps calling him Solo, which I think is
Yeah.
funny. But obviously it's more metaphorically, like you said, looking into his soul and understanding that she knows people and she can tell that, which I think is something that definitely sets her apart from Yoda. I mean, obviously, we're kind of comparing apples to oranges here in a lot of ways, but I mean, again, you were talking about like that sage wisdom and that ancient wisdom that comes with Maz and comes with Yoda, but Yoda was definitely a lot more pragmatic, and he was a lot more, oriented to the rules of the Jedi kind of thing. But Maz goes beneath the surface, which I think really sets her apart. And that's so cool.
Yeah. It's similar to Yoda is that, we've seen how he uses his little ploys to, get at Luke and teach him something, or, to try and learn about Luke, about whether he's got patience and what type of person he is when he first gets to Dagobah, stuff like that. She's doing the same type of thing. She just has a slightly different approach to it. But
Yep. Yep.
I still want like a story that takes place like 500 years before all of this, where Maz and Yoda are like on some sort of adventure. Like he goes off, he's assigned by the Jedi Order to do something, and he runs into her. When they're both like in their prime. I think that'd be a
Oh,
fantastic
that
story.
would be fantastic. Yes, please make it so.
Yeah. So Finn gets up and leaves, and Rey is just like utterly surprised by all this. And she goes to find him, and he asks her to come with him. But Rey is still on task in this moment. She says, what about BB-8? What about the mission? We're not done yet. And he says he can't do it. Oh, this is actually before they get him up off the table. And so he gets up to leave, but Han lets him keep the blaster. And then Rey starts to follow him off, and we'll get to the next part of the conversation in a second. But Maz asks Han, who's the girl? And I know we've had this conversation before that, one of the things that this movie did is it built up the mystery of who is Rey. And of course, we finally get the answer. Well, we get the answer twice. We get it once in The Last Jedi, and then they completely contradict it in The Rise of Skywalker. So clearly, J.J. Abrams, I feel like, had other ideas, and then Rian Johnson decided to do something else when he got a hold of the story here. But don't you get the feeling like this is one of those instances that they really are planting the seeds that Rey is supposed to be a revelation at some point?
Oh, yeah.
Because, I mean, and that, not to bag on The Last Jedi again, but that's one of the things I found unsatisfying is that they built up the mystery multiple times in this movie only to say she's nobody in The Last Jedi.
Oh, yeah. And that's the thing. I mean, Rey has always been that center point of discussion from this movie is like, oh, where did she come from? Who is she? What is her lineage? Who could be her parents? What's going on here? And Maz instantly latches right onto that because, again, going back to that maybe force sensitivity, that she can sense something about Rey in her presence that she knows that, okay, there's something special about this one. And what's the story? How did you end up with her? And why ultimately is she here right now? So Maz is obviously a collector of knowledge, not just a person that can see people, but she needs to have those little nuggets to be able to assess a situation as well. So I'm wondering if she's feeling the buzz from obviously the lightsaber being there, and, maybe there's some sort of like almost electricity in the air from the moment that Rey walked in the room,
Yeah, because at this point, there hasn't been any real hint that Rey is force sensitive. And this, of course, we know it by the end of the movie. And then there's going to be a scene here in just a moment that we're discussing that lays it out for us that there's something going on. There's a bigger, grander destiny for Rey besides being a scavenger from Jakku in this movie. And that's great. Again, I don't want to do The Last Jedi conversation now, but I know a lot of people liked about that movie is it democratized the Force, so to speak, in that if she's from nowhere, then anyone, you don't have to have that bloodline, the Skywalker bloodline. Yeah, I've got my own arguments against that, which I'll save till not next year, but in a couple of years from now when we get around to discussing that movie. But anyway, here she is, and as you just suggested, Maz knows something's up with this girl, and she's already figured out Finn, right? She's looked into Finn. She knows that he's scared. He knows she wants to run. She knows everything that she needs to know about Finn, but Rey is still, she's still trying to figure out Rey. There's a mystery behind Rey in this situation. And, and that's why she looks at Han. Who's this girl? Because there's, and it goes back to like right when they got to Takodana and, Rey's reacting to how much green and stuff like that. And there's that like look of regret on Han's face. Is it a red herring that, that at that time that maybe this was Han and Leia's estranged daughter or, Luke's daughter or something like that? And, but he's still not certain. And so he's putting it together. Maybe that was the case. I don't know. Like, I'm not getting inside their head. But one of my regrets about this trilogy is that as much as they built up the mystery of Rey and this, it just kind of got dismissed in The Last Jedi.
Yeah.
And I kind of find that regrettable. So.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I agree with you. And, I want to talk about Finn just a little bit too, with his motivations because he seems at this point because Maz calls him right out and says, oh, yeah, you see those guys over there, the Crimson Corsair guys, that they'll give you passage to the outer rim for work. So she can sense that Finn wants out. And so I think up to this point, obviously when he escaped the First Order, he didn't do it because he wanted to join the Resistance. He did it because he was horrified at what he saw, what he was being asked to do, and because he wanted to survive. But then he met Rey, right? So that kind of changed everything for him. And so now that he's hearing this from Maz, the evil has taken many forms. It's the First Order. He's like, no, you can't beat them. No, I'm out. But so all of a sudden he's turning his back on these people that he met. And it just seems to me like he's almost running like a dog with a tail between their legs and just turning his back completely against them. And obviously the whole Starkiller base thing just shook him to the core when he witnessed that, and that kind of made him take a 180. But did you think that it was kind of, I don't know if I would say odd necessarily for him to, now he's found almost I don't want to say found family necessarily, but he did have a connection with Rey like right away. And yes, he says, come with me. Let's just leave. Let's just go. But then ultimately he decides that he's going to do it on his own. How do you feel about that?
Well, okay. That brings up the next part of the scene, which I'm going to lay it out and then I'll answer your question. So, he's already said that we got to run. And so Maz points him to the Crimson Corsair and his first mate. And so he's over there trying to book passage. And so he wants to get to the other room. And then Rey interrupts the meeting and says, what are you doing? You can't just go. I won't let you. And then his response is, I'm not who you think I am. And then she says, Finn, what are you talking about? So he says, I'm not resistance. I'm not a hero. I'm a stormtrooper. Like all of them, I was taken from a family I'll never know and raised to do one thing. But my first battle, I made a choice. I wasn't going to kill for them. So I ran right into you. But then you looked at me like no one ever had. I was ashamed of what I was, but I'm done with the First Order. I'm never going back. Rey, come with me. And then she says, don't go. And then when he realizes that she's not going to come with him, he says, take care of yourself, please. And Rey watches him leave. And then that's when we get into the whole vision sequence, which we'll get into in a minute. So, no, I think Finn is being true to who he is at this point. And I think this is an important part of his story arc over the course of this movie and through at least the next movie in the trilogy, is that he's not interested in being a hero. He's not interested in fighting the First Order. And yeah, we're going to see Starkiller Brace blow up Hosnian Prime here in a minute. And he doesn't even change his mind about running away at that point. It's only after they get confronted by the stormtroopers and he sees Rey get carried off by Kylo Ren that it's not about defeating the First Order. It's only about rescuing Rey because of this connection. While he was with the First Order, he had no connection to the other stormtroopers that he was being raised up with. That wasn't allowed. They didn't
Mm-hmm.
have friendships like that. When we see the beginning of the movie and that one stormtrooper gets shot and then reaches up with a bloody hand and swipes his finger down Finn's face, FN 2147, at the time, that's like the closest he's had to one of those type of moments. And, we get some of that outlined in the books that Delilah Dawson wrote, right? With the book about Batu, and then the Captain Phasma book that she wrote that kind of gets into
Mm-hmm.
some of the training, stuff like that. It's brutal.
Oh yeah.
And, they're interchangeable. One of the reasons why they all wear identical costumes is that because they're fungible in that regard here. And so he meets Ray, and that line he says, like, I ran right into you, but then you looked at me like no one ever had. She cared about him as a person. She respected him for what he was doing and stuff like that. And so, you know, yeah, he is walking away, but at this point, it's like he's interested in survival. He's not interested in fighting the First Order. And so, is it surprising? Maybe, in that we'd want our heroes to do better in this moment, but it's so important to his character arc over the course of this movie and the sequel trilogy that he grows beyond this. He looks to
Mm-hmm.
do something bigger beyond than himself, enjoying something bigger. And it's kind of like the anti-Luke. Luke wasn't joining the rebellion because he was being held back by his uncle. It wasn't out of fear, it was out of obligation. And now Finn is not joining the resistance because it's out of fear. And
Mm-hmm.
then it's a friendship obligation that brings him back into the fold. Ultimately, a friendship for Rey and then a friendship for Poe later.
Yeah, yeah. And you talk about Finn's character arc, and I feel like I've really come to appreciate Finn a lot more just revisiting this movie, especially
Mm-hmm.
because just rewatching this particular scene when Finn tells Rey, like, I'm a stormtrooper. You would think that the camera would switch to Rey's face to get her initial reaction about that, but it doesn't. And I
Yep.
think that, at first I was like, oh, that would have been kind of cool to see Rey's reaction. But I think it was brilliant the way that they kept it, the way that they focused on Finn, the way that his eyes, were pleading with Rey and telling her about, I mean, obviously he's been traumatized and he's felt like he's never fit into the whole stormtrooper role his entire life. And so, obviously there's so much more to talk about with Finn, and we could really go down like a major rabbit hole with that. But what I think is so cool about him as a hero is that he doesn't start off brave. He starts off scared, and it's not about him becoming more powerful at any point. It's about him just becoming more courageous and
Mm-hmm.
finding what is truly important to him. And I think I just think that's brilliant.
Yeah. If it's kind of frustrating if you read some of the time material that came out at about the same time as the movie did. Clearly, they didn't give the writers enough to go by because they kind of portrayed him as like an elite stormtrooper,
Mhm.
uh, and then who has a change of heart during this whole thing, which that's not a fair characterization, but that's not the case
Mm-mm.
at all. I mean, he's talking about his first battle. He couldn't do it. He couldn't kill for
Right.
them. Not that he did a lot of killing in those other tie-in books, but you know, he then gets refined later. Based on the end of this movie, is like he was the janitor. He was the one mopping the
Right.
floors, and so
My
that
favorite.
ends up coming up in other tie-in material to the movie as well. So um, but anyway, yeah, no, I think that point you made about the camera not leaving his face. I also think it speaks volume about Ray because she's seen his character. He is afraid at this point, but she's seen what he was willing to do. He was looking out for her on Jakku after he looked at her that way that no one else had ever looked before, and they fought off First Order TIE fighters together. They survived the Rathars together. They got this far together. And so she's like, she's seen past all that, so she's saying, don't go. She doesn't make a comment at all about him being a
Mhm.
stormtrooper and this.
Yeah.
And when he sees that is not going to sway her from her decision, then he respects that. And he says, take care of yourself, please, because he's met
Yeah.
someone unlike anyone else he's met before in this. So I think that's kind of profound.
Mhm. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. He just threw all that at her, and she did not back away from him. So, yeah, it's
Yeah.
definitely important.
Okay, let's get into a very meaty segment here. So, bewildered, Rey lets him go, and then she starts to hear a child scream. And it's clearly like not actually present. She's hearing this. And she descends some steps into the catacombs of Maz's palace. And BB-8's following. I love how this time around I heard clunk, clunk, clunk as he's coming down the stairs.
Uh-huh.
But Rey pays no attention to that. She continues to hear this child scream. And then she walks down a corridor, a door opens in front of her, and she's presented with an old like treasure chest, which she opens to find a lightsaber inside. Okay, stop for just a second. We know that Luke's lightsaber and stuff like that. I still want the story of how Maz came by Luke's lightsaber.
Right?
I mean,
I
we still don't
know.
have that story. I know there were some drafts of this script where the opening scene was not of a Star Destroyer silhouetted by the moon and then the First Order transports bringing the stormtroopers down to Jakku to take out the Church of the Force in Lower Santeca, but rather Luke's severed hand floating through space and then burning up through the atmosphere onto some planet, whether it was Jakku or Takodana or whatever, and someone leaning over and picking it up, which frankly, I'm glad we didn't get that. That's kind of
A
gruesome,
little
but
graphic.
you're right. But still, yeah, I need that story. How did that ultimately get taken off of Best? I don't think we've gotten it anywhere. Do you recall?
No, I don't recall that. And it's funny because there's just so many things I feel like in Star Wars that we've just accepted. And
Uh-huh.
it's kind of like when you stop and think about it like this, oh, yeah, how did that happen? Where did that come from? Why did that happen the way that it did? And this is definitely one of those. And what else was in the box with the lightsaber? Because there was some sort of like necklace or beads or something of
Yeah.
that nature in there too. So I would love to know what the significance of all of those things are.
On second thought, I'm not sure I want to know the story of how she got the lightsaber because I think I'd be disappointed, whatever it ends up being.
Maybe.
It's
Yeah.
yeah, it might be one of those things that's better untold. And we can use our imaginations for, but
Sure. Mhm.
anyway, okay. So she reaches for the lightsaber and then she starts experiencing the vision. The room goes dark and we see images of a passage from Bespin, and then we can hear Luke screaming no. And I think we can get a little bit of Darth Vader's breathing. The room falls on its side. In the background, we can hear Yoda speaking. Its energy surrounds us and binds us. So the speech that he gave Luke on Dagobah. Rey lands on the ground, and then she looks up, and there's fire and embers floating in the air. And then she sees basically what we know to be Luke with his hood put over his face. We can't see his face. We heard another scream of no, and he puts his hand on R2's dome. And then she rolls over, and she's in a new environment, which is nighttime with rain, and someone moves to club Rey, but they are run through with a red lightsaber. We then see Kylo Ren and the Knights of Ren on a muddy field in the rain with bodies strewn out all over around them. And we hear Obi-Wan say, "The Force." Kylo then moves towards Rey. She turns around and is on Jakku. She sees her younger self screaming, "No, come back!" But she's being held back by Unkar Plutt. We see his arm. And a ship flies off in the background. We then hear Obi-Wan say, "Rey," and then Rey runs off into a forest, only to find Kylo Ren surging out at her with his lightsaber ignited. She then stumbles backwards and falls to the ground and out of the vision back in the catacombs on Maz Kanata's palace. But we hear Obi-Wan whisper, "These are your first steps," which I tried to mimic at the beginning of this episode. So there's a lot in this vision.
Mhm.
What stands out to you?
Well, first of all, you can understand why Ray was a little freaked out by all of this. I mean, imagine that your whole life you've just been scavenging for things on a desert planet and eating green bread and a fallen AT-AT, and then all of a sudden now you're like given all of these crazy visions. But I mean, obviously, this is for more for us than it is for, I don't necessarily want to say more for us than it is for Ray, but it definitely sets things up for what kind of legacy she is dealing with here and not necessarily defining her place in it, but showing, especially with her little flashback, seeing that yes, she was in fact abandoned. I mean, down to the hairstyle. I mean, how spot on can you be, right? With
Mhm.
that, and just the connections between obviously a lot of things that she has no idea what they are, what they mean, who they are. She can pick out things like maybe BB-8. She could recognize Kylo Ren. She's never seen Luke, so she doesn't know what he looks like, but she's
Or
getting him in
R2.
this vision, or R2, right? Getting him in this vision. And so, yeah, so it's super trippy for her. And this is also to the point where with Obi-Wan's voice, I was like, that's got to be her dad because that's who's speaking to her. It's got to be the love child of he and
Yeah.
Satine, right?
Right.
So yeah, so there's just so much going on in this that she is literally bombarded. And so we can kind of think of this as almost like a cave scene in some ways,
Hmm.
where it's like a force nexus of things going on and being introduced to her, and the force is introducing it to her and doing a very poor job of, obviously overwhelming her. But yeah, this was a lot to unpack in the movie theater. I remember sitting there going, holy cow, what just happened? You know?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
how would you dissect it?
Well, I thought about this a lot, and I'm trying to figure out what the vision is exactly telling her. And in some aspects, it seems a little bit autobiographical because it starts off those scenes in Bespin, which is where Luke lost this lightsaber, right?
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
then it ends with a scene in the forest, which is at the end of this movie, where Rey is going to take up this lightsaber and fight Kylo Ren. So there's a little bit about that. But then, Maz Kanata shows up after this and points out this lightsaber was Luke's and his father's before him, and now it calls to you. So it seems like maybe the lightsaber, the kyber crystal, whatever you want to say, or the force through the kyber crystal is trying to impart a message upon her. This lightsaber belonged to Luke Skywalker, but it's the force. It doesn't ever speak clearly. And so it's showing some pertinent information because she's never seen Kylo Ren at this point. She may not even know who Kylo Ren is,
Mhm.
'cause she's been living on Jakku. She knows what the resistance is, so she's probably heard of Kylo, but she's never seen him. But she has a very clear vision here, or the Knights of Ren for that matter. And so I'm wondering if it is the lightsaber trying to convey upon her, this is who the last person was to wield me, and these are some things that he's gone through, even though the lightsaber wasn't there. I mean,
Yeah.
it wasn't there on I can't think of the name of the planet at the moment, but it doesn't matter that Luke builds his tempo Tython. That Luke will end up building us Tython on that Kylo Ren destroys, and it obviously hasn't been there yet in the forest on Starkiller Base or Ilum, as we'll know it. But it's
Mhm.
giving her a vision of the future, a possible future. We know the future is always in motion, as Yoda will tell us here. But it's trying to convey that. I think it's trying to convey that these are things that are going to be important. You need to take up this lightsaber. That Luke's lightsaber is kind of like, or the Skywalker lightsaber, I should call it, is kind of like Excalibur. It's this mythical weapon at this point. It's something that Kylo wants desperately. We never get a good explanation for that,
Mhm. Mhm.
other than the only one we can infer is that he's so keen on following the legacy of his grandfather, Anakin, that maybe that's just something he wants as part of his collection because he has his grandfather's helmet, melted helmet in his room. But yeah, it's I'm not sure there is a clear explanation for this, but I feel like there were things that were laid down here that really could have been picked up on in the next two movies that were really just set aside.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And I
Mhm.
feel like the Force just got so excited in Rey's presence that it's almost like when you have a plant that hasn't been watered in a very long time, and then you try to, like, water it all at once, things just start overflowing. And
Mhm.
then you could also tell that Maz, I wouldn't necessarily use the word giddy, but when she comes, she's like, "That lightsaber was Luke's and his father's before him, and now it calls to you." Like, she's like, "Oh my gosh, like, this is, like, the coolest thing ever. You're
Mhm.
here. You and I knew there was something special about you," kind of thing.
And
And that's
doesn't not to interrupt you, but does not
yeah.
that also suggest in all of those clues that she's the next person in the Skywalker lineage that maybe should be holding this thing?
Right, exactly,
Mhm.
exactly. But I think that the Force was very correct in not showing Rey what else was done with that lightsaber because, if she would have seen the attack on the younglings at the temple, then that would have like really thrown her over the edge, because obviously that was used for that as well. So yeah, but I just think that this whole sequence, like you said, it drops so many different breadcrumbs that could have been so well, expanded upon, and just never were. I will say that the Knights of Ren in this particular little like flashback or forward or whatever you want to call it, so cool. Like
Yeah.
we don't really even get that at all in the future. This is probably one of the best glimpses of them that we actually get.
I mean, because they're entirely absent from The Last Jedi.
Right. Yeah.
And then they show up for a couple scenes in The Rise of Skywalker, but they definitely should have been more of a thing,
Oh,
given,
for sure.
when Snoke points out Kylo, master of the Knights of Ren, earlier in this movie, it's like, I don't know if they got enough big enough payoff anywhere in the sequel trilogy. So,
Mm-hmm. No, I
okay.
get it. Mm-hmm.
So moving a little bit beyond this, as you pointed out, Maz comes down. She's that lightsaber is Luke's in his father's form, and now it calls to you. And then Rey is still not having it. She says she needs to get back to Jakku, but Maz takes her hand, and she's getting through to Rey in the moment. It doesn't last long in a way that nobody else can, because Finn makes her mark. Is why you got to get back to Jakku? You got a family there, a boyfriend, a cute boyfriend, and Han's even like incredulous that she wants to go back to Jakku. But Maz says, dear child, I see your eyes. So we're getting back into her, she recognizes people and what she's seeing in people. You
Mhm.
already know the truth. Whomever you're waiting for on Jakku, they're never coming back. And I think there's nobody else that could have put it as gently and gotten through to Rey in that moment.
Yeah.
And she doesn't deny it. When she ultimately leaves, she wants something to do with the lightsaber, but she cries a little bit. And the Maz says, but there's someone who still could. And then Rey says, Luke. So, it's clear to me, this part of the conversation has helped me clear up the vision a little bit, that this was about Luke being a potential mentor, that this lightsaber belongs to Luke, that this lightsaber has and Luke have something to do with your destiny. And then Maz says, the belonging you seek is not behind you, it is ahead. I am no Jedi, but I know the Force. It moves through and surrounds every living thing. Quoting Yoda. Close your eyes, feel it. The light, it's always been there. I will guide you. The saber, take it. And I think at that point, Maz kind of overplayed her hand, because Rey immediately jumps up and says, I'm never touching that thing again. Then she runs out into the woods. Okay.
Mhm.
So I think for me, that little passage right there eliminates any doubt that Maz has some ability with a Force. If she can
Mhm.
close her eyes and feels it and is telling Rey to do the exact same thing. But what other observations do you have about this part of the conversation?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think Maz gets a little too overexcited that this saber has called to Rey, because obviously she was right about her from the moment that Rey walked into her castle, that there was something about this girl. And so I think that for the Vision to kind of choose Rey, and then for Maz to put that legacy onto Rey, was just way, way, way too much all at one time. But I think maybe Maz is a little bit, I don't necessarily want to say desperate, but she feels like, oh gosh, finally, like you said, like the Excalibur thing, the person that was able to pull it from the stone, she was able to connect with the saber. And maybe there's been others that have visited the castle that have, touched the saber, or, maybe she's even presented it to certain people with the thought that maybe they could be the one. So, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different ways that you could go with that. I don't know.
So, yeah, this just highlights some of the frustration I have with the two movies that come after this, is that there was so much laid out here. And then we get two different conflicting visions between the next two movies, where I think that they would have been better served building on this in Last Jedi and then building on it again in The Rise of Skywalker. And okay, they didn't do that. So I'm not going to spend any more time lamenting that right here. But I do like the mythology that's in all of this, that she just got to see these scenes of Luke and maybe why it is that he's run off. And there is this connection that's being created by Maz between Rey and Luke, and that, she could be the one that brings him back to the fight. Now, ultimately, that's what happens in The Last Jedi, right? But it's the sense of belonging here that she seeks lies ahead. And I really feel like that's kind of unfulfilled going forward in this case.
Mhm.
It's not with Luke. Her sense of belonging comes with Finn, Poe, Leia, and the resistance in
Right.
this. So, so in a way, Maz is right. Yeah, the sense of belonging you're looking for is in the future. It's not behind you, but it's not the direction Maz points her.
Yeah. And I feel like this is one of the biggest struggles in the entire trilogy too, because I mean, Rey, she keeps being pulled back towards questions
Mhm.
of her lineage and identity, regardless of how forward she moves.
Mhm.
And so I just, yeah, it's so hard
Yeah.
to
Well,
for
and here
her.
she is again denying the call in this.
Yes.
It's she denied it at the beginning of the movie when BB-8 showed up, and then she relented and she helped out, and then action was forced upon her when she met Finn, and the First Order came after both of them. And of course, I'm skipping over the whole thing with a misunderstanding over Poe's jacket, but and now she has an opportunity to take. I mean, this is like the ultimate, like, here is the sword, go slay the dragon moment, and she refuses.
Mhm.
Only it's later in the movie when, she's kind of backed in a corner, so to speak, that, Finn's been injured, and now, that she calls the lightsaber and she takes up the call at that point. But, she's getting multiple opportunities here, and she kind of gets on board, and then she falls off on this because she's got her own doubts. So,
For sure.
okay. All right. Well, let's move to the last portion of this segment. So we see Starkiller base, and Hux is making a speech in front of legions of stormtroopers, pilots, and officers. We see red First Order banners all over the place, and Phasma's there and other officers that we've seen in brief moments from earlier in the movie. And he starts giving the speech, and he just gets more animated as he talks. And I'm hoping I can get through this coughing. Today is the end of the Republic. I love this. The end of a regime that acquiesces to disorder. At this very moment, in a system far from here, the New Republic lies to the galaxy while secretly supporting the treachery of the loathsome resistance. The first machine that you have built, upon which we stand, will bring an end to the Senate, to the cherished fleet. All remaining systems will now bow to the First Order and remember this as the last day of the Republic. Fire. So,
Nice.
Domhnall Gleeson is wasted in the sequel trilogy after this scene.
Mhm.
And because he is such a zealot for the First Order here, he is such a driving force for the First Order. And he's like standing up in front of all these stormtroopers that respect him from all appearances and everything else. And he's kind of turned into a caricature after this.
Yes.
Uh,
I
but
agree.
this was such a great scene and such a great delivery. I wish we could have gotten more of this in the rest of the sequel trilogy.
Oh, he was chilling. I mean, just absolutely chilling in this moment. And yeah, I remember getting goosebumps listening to this the first time because it was just like, wow, okay, this is the Death Star and the Empire times 10 right here. And just the way that the stormtroopers come to attention, right then. Whew,
Yeah.
that was big.
I think his little speech also says volumes about him and the other officers, not the stormtroopers, because as Finn just pointed out, they were kidnapped as children and pretty much raised against their will into this. But a guy like Hux didn't have such indoctrination in that regard. So he's talking about how the Republic is lying to the galaxy. They are the problem with this galaxy. They acquiesce to disorder. They're not doing anything about it. He views the First Order as bringing order. I mean, talk about being on point. But that they are going to make up for the shortfalls of the First Order. And then he says that they're lying to the galaxy. What are they lying to the galaxy? While secretly supporting the treachery of the loathsome resistance. So, reading between the lines here, he views the First Order as the heir to the Empire, as the legitimate government of the galaxy that will impose the order back on the galaxy that's been lacking since the Empire fell. And the Republic is so complicit in the crimes that they are backing the resistance without the rest of the galaxy knowing it. And the resistance is what's standing in the way of the First Order, despite the fact they're the small motley fleet in all of this
Mhm.
here. And
Mhm.
so it's kind of an underrated perspective piece from Hux in this movie. That how he and other officers, he'll say this. later he says, this first machine which you have built, upon which you stand, will bring an end to the Senate, to the chair's fleet. All remaining citizens will bow to the first order. That's not talking about democracy. That's
No.
talking about tyranny right there. So it really is kind of like this warped sense of what is appropriate, what is justice, what is order in the galaxy.
Yeah, and you get the sense that this is Hux's wheelhouse right here, is being in front of a crowd and, making these statements and that type of thing, because he does come from a military family, right? I mean, his dad is in the First Order as well. And then you've also got the fact that you sort of get the sense that Hux is a little bit of a whipping boy when it comes to some of the earlier scenes with Snoke and then being next to Kylo Ren. Kylo Ren kind of represents to him, I think, a little bit. I don't want to necessarily say what Vader represented to Tarkin, but in a sense, he is. It's kind of like, what are we doing with him? Why are you putting all your eggs in this basket, kind of thing? And so I think for Hux, this moment is his triumph over, in being able to show that this is what we're going to do to the galaxy and no one's going to stand in our way.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. I mean, I just like the Hux we got in this movie a whole lot better than what comes afterwards, because he,
I agree.
even, when they are having that conversation with Snoke, it's, Hux prevails over Kylo. Not that Kylo put up much resistance, about wanting to charge up the weapon and destroy the Republic with it.
Mhm.
And so, it is his decision. He's in charge of Starkiller Base. This is his achievement, not Kylo's in this regard. So that aside, what did you think of Starkiller Base overall?
Oh my gosh. I mean, again, it's like Death Star on steroids, right? So you've got this one base that is able to blow up multiple planets at once. I mean, we were completely, pun intended, I guess, blown away when the Death Star targeted Alderaan, one planet. And then here you've got these fingers of destruction reaching out from the center of this axis, this equator, sorry, on Starkiller Base, and it's just wreaking havoc. And you can see the terror in people's eyes, which I think is both kind of a genius stroke and also terrifying, because we didn't get that on Alderaan. You know what I mean? And I understand why. I mean,
Sure.
you get it, but you get that perspective of the people on these planets watching this happen and knowing that the inevitable is about to take them as well. So it's horrifying. I mean, honestly, they did a great job of hitting that home and putting the exclamation point on, like, oh my gosh, Finn was right. There is no way to escape this. Like, how are you supposed to, get away from something like this?
Yeah.
But what do you think?
No, I think everything you said is right on. I am going to take us out of the movie for just a second, because there are a number of physics problems with Starkiller Base. And I'm not talking about the structure of the weapon sucking energy from a star, because, well, I am going to talk about that for a second. Once you've done that, how are you supporting life on this planet anyway, without it immediately moving to someplace else, which we don't see it do?
For sure. Yeah.
2, it fires that weapon. Hux is looking on it without any eye protection. I'm sorry, you just fried your
Right.
retinas. So there's that.
Good point.
3, that beam goes across the galaxy and within moments destroys all the planets in the Hosnian system. That should have taken light years for it to get across there. It shouldn't have been any type of anything. Okay, so it's important to remember this is a space opera, not science fiction.
Right.
Second, beyond that, no one else should have been able to necessarily see this. Anyone on Takodana, it should have taken them years to see that light coming to the planet. But it happens again
That's
for
a good
cinematic
point.
effect right in this moment. And so you've got all these problems. I looked into this, and Wikipedia, apparently, I guess after this movie was being created, and by the time I think it was Foster that wrote the novelization, apparently wrote something in and I haven't revisited this. I just didn't have time today. Wrote something about how this weapon like rips through subspace and goes through hyperspace to attack its targets. And since it distorts space, it makes itself visible all over the galaxy. But I mean,
Oh.
and so like yeah, I mean, because like they see the planets destroyed from Takodana. Well, they're not in the same system. That shouldn't be possible and stuff like that. So anyway,
I never thought of it that way.
right,
Good point.
to quote Neil deGrasse Tyson, probably the most famous physicist we know, it's okay if you want to violate the rules of physics. Your galaxy that you create can have its own physics. You just have to be consistent with them there.
Mm-hmm.
We never see Starkiller based fire or anything else. So I guess mission accomplished. But at any rate, it's one of the things if you sit back and you think about, I used to listen to Star Talk all the time, so I was kind of aware of some of these things and stuff like that. But yeah, it's this type of a weapon requires a lot more finagling with the physics in order to get it to work, so that people could see it across the galaxy, and for it to have the impact it did. But it did. So
It sure did. It had a big effect.
right. So yeah, of course you pointed out the horror of the people there that were on Hosnian Prime as they experienced it. And then we get to see the Han, the other patrons of Maz's bar, come streaming out to see what happened. And they're looking up into the space and they see the destruction of the planets, it's their moons, the fleet. And then Finn comes running up. It was the Republic, the First Order, they've done it. And then he says, "Where's Rey?" And that's the end of our segment there. So we'll be picking up with a really cool scene next time, the invasion of the First Order there at Takodana. I love that one. But
Yes.
any other final thoughts about this segment before we wrap it up?
I don't think so. I mean, I think we pretty much hit everything that I had in my notes that I wanted to point out.
Yeah.
But yeah, as always, it's such a great way to revisit these movies and really get into the nitty-gritty of everything. So I always definitely look forward to these segments. That's for sure.
Me too. Me too. Okay. Well, then, I want to thank you all for joining us for this episode of Podcast Stardust and this installment of our The Force Awakens series. Again, thanks for bearing with me. As you can tell, my voice is on the verge of collapsing at this point, but I'm hoping I'm going to get all the coughing out because I did have to take a number of breaks throughout this one. We hope you've enjoyed it. And if so, make sure you come back next month for the next installment in the series, as well as all the other content we've got going on. We have an upcoming episode in our Darth Bane book club that'll be coming out in a few weeks. Jay's got more installments of World Between Worlds, where she rounds up finds in Star Wars fashion and lifestyle products. They'll be coming out. We're continuing to cover the Clone Wars and our rewatch. And of course, we wrap up each week with the news. And we have other surprises in store from time to time. But anyways, I'll get into what's coming up in the next few episodes as we get towards the end of this. But just want to remind you that you can subscribe to the podcast on your podcatcher of choice. And if we're not there, let me know, and I'll try and get it there. I don't know what'll have to be done. We'll figure it out. We appreciate your ratings, reviews, and comments wherever it is that you listen to the show. And I'd like to remind you that you can find all back episodes, all 1,045 of them, over at retrozop.com, with all the other great shows that are on the network. Jay, you want to go ahead and remind everybody what our social media contacts are and where else they can find us?
Absolutely. So you can connect with us most easily on Facebook and Instagram at Podcast Stardust. And you can also check out our plethora of Pinterest boards. And you can also listen to us on our YouTube outlets, which include YouTube and YouTube Music. So hit us up over there, like, subscribe, share those out, leave us some comments. And if you'd like to leave us even more comments or connect with us even further, you can drop us a line at our email, which is podcaststardust@gmail.com. And if you'd like to pick up some Podcast Stardust merch, we do have a TeePublic store, and the link to that is in our show notes. And you can head over to that store and check out one of 7 different show logo designs that you can slap on a t-shirt, a sweatshirt, a coffee mug, a ball cap. There's some athletic shorts over there, socks, all kinds of fun things. So I need to get some socks, just saying. So once again, that is in our show notes.
All right. What is the latest in cosplay?
All right. Well, a little quiet on the cosplay front right now. Taking a little bit of a break, I guess you could say. I had a huge May, so you can check out all my adventures on my Instagram, which is at j.snipscosplay. And I do have some things way out on the calendar for this fall, but for now, you can catch me as Ahsoka, Hera, the Fourth Sister, my original concept Mandalorian, and much, much more.
Okay. Upcoming on the show on Friday, the plan is to end the week with a look at some recent Star Wars news, and then on Monday we'll be getting back into our rewatch of the Clone Wars with the final episode of season 3, which is another Ahsoka-centric episode. So make sure you check that out. All right, thanks for listening to episode 1046 of Podcast Stardust, everyone. Have a great rest of your week. And until next time, may the Force be with you.